Today in the EU divided over tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles amid growing geopolitical tensions. Discussions about tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, EVs, are intensifying following a recent meeting of industry ministers in Brussels on Thursday, 26th of September. Member states are split on supporting these tariffs, with undecided countries like Sweden and Germany potentially abstaining. China's Commerce Minister Wang Wentao toured Europe earlier this month to lobby against the tariffs. Simultaneously, the European Commission and China are negotiating a price undertaking agreement that would set a minimum price for Chinese EVs in Europe to avoid tariffs. All this is happening amid growing geopolitical tensions between China and the EU, and increasing concern about the economic risks, particularly in Germany, which is heavily dependent on the Chinese auto market and may face retaliatory measures. Hello and welcome. I am Eva Chiori, and this is Today in the EU. To better understand what is happening with the EU-China negotiations, we spoke with our economy reporter, Thomas Müller-Nielsen. Tom, we're back with discussing what seems as a never-ending saga, the Chinese electric vehicles imported in the European market. What's new on this?
Well, a lot has happened in the last couple of weeks. So, long story short, over the last few months, the tariffs that the Commission have announced have been revised downwards, but only slightly. We're talking like a matter of percentage points. And this is due to either mathematical mistakes or corroborated comments from these Chinese EV makers. Now, these tariffs that are right now, they've only been provisionally applied. They will be definitively imposed, and this is the only strict deadline, so to speak, by the 30th of October. So that is when these provisional tariffs have to become definitive. And by definitive, that means that they will be imposed for a period of 5 years.
Last week, on the 19th of September, EU Trade Commissioner Valdis Dombrovskis met with Wang Wentao, the Chinese Commerce Minister, to re-examine the EU tariff decision on Chinese electric vehicle imports. What happened during this meeting, and was something decided?
Last week, the Chinese Commerce Minister, a guy called Wang Wentao, met with the Trade Commissioner, Valdis Dombrovskis. And this came at the end of this, I guess you could call it a Euro tour. So Wang went to Italy, and he went to Germany, and then he ended up ultimately in Brussels. Now, the reason why he was visiting these different capitals was to try to persuade European member states to vote against these tariffs when they are ultimately put to a vote. Among member states. So most people believe that the tariffs, if they can't go to a vote, they will ultimately pass. And the reason for this is that it's more difficult to overturn them. In order to overturn the tariffs, what needs to happen is 15 member states, representing 65% of the union's population, have to vote against it. Now, in a advisory vote in June, only 4 member states voted against. And these were Cyprus, Malta, Hungary, and Slovakia. Germany, Europe's largest economy, abstained, which is quite interesting, given the fact that its auto industry is heavily exposed to China. I think it's fairly obvious what's happening is Wang is going to these European capitals. He's also inviting European leaders to China. So Pedro Sanchez, the Spanish leader, he went to China a few weeks ago. And I realize this is a long story, but Wang went to Italy. That visit was unfortunately unsuccessful. So the Italian foreign minister, Antonio Tajani, before the meeting with Wang even took place, he said Italy is going to support the European Commission's position on electric vehicle tariffs. That visit was unsuccessful. He then went to Germany. He met with Robert Habeck, Germany's economy minister, who basically, he'd already suggested that he was going to support Pedro Sanchez's line about not wanting the tariffs to be imposed. And then he came to Brussels and he met with Dombrovskis. There's a sense in which the meeting was unsuccessful insofar as there was no negotiated solution to this ongoing dispute. Having said that, it was a significant step forward. And the reason why it was a significant step forward is China was able to persuade the European Union to re-examine what's called price undertakings. So these are basically the idea is China says, okay, we're going to sell our vehicles, our electric vehicles in Europe for a minimum price. And in exchange for this, you don't impose tariffs. Now, the European Commission had previously announced a couple of weeks before that, in fact, a week before that, that it had rejected a previous offer, price undertaking. We don't know what the details are. Unfortunately, they haven't been released and they haven't been leaked to the media. Chinese firms say that the offers were, very good, but ultimately they were rejected. On just a few days before the meeting between Wang and Dombrovskis, what was particularly interesting is that the European Commission said the deadline for issuing for another price offer has passed. It's lapsed. And they said that the deadline was 24th of August. So there's a strong sense in which the meeting between Wang and Dombrovskis went quite well, I would say, for China. In particular, the European Commission, they retracted their original position. Their position was no more price undertakings. And then the two sides agreed, renewed price undertakings. We're going to take a renewed look. That's what they said.
And yesterday there was a competitiveness meeting in Brussels. What happened there and what was the position of EU members?
The issue of how member states will vote hasn't actually been... some member states are still quite literally making up their minds. So on Thursday, so at the Competitiveness Council that took place in Brussels, the Swedish Trade Minister, a guy called Benjamin Dusa, he said, we are currently working on Sweden's position for the upcoming votes. So basically saying, look, Sweden hasn't ultimately decided. Sweden abstained in the advisory vote in June. He said China's vehicles are unjustly subsidized, but, we are a country that believes in free trade and so on and so forth. Also, it's worth noting Geely, one of the Chinese firms that's been hit by tariffs, it's the parent company of Volvo, the Swedish car manufacturer. Yeah. So that's also part of the reason. It's also interesting given the fact that Northvolt, which is a Swedish battery maker, it's suffering quite significantly. So despite the fact that Northvolt, Swedish company is not doing particularly well and is being impacted by Chinese competition. Nevertheless, Sweden might not want to vote in favor of these tariffs. The Spanish industry minister, Jordi Herrui Borja, he reiterated Pedro Sanchez's comments on Thursday. He said, look, we want to flee from trade wars. So we don't want a trade war. We're, again, suggesting that Spain is worried about these retaliatory tariffs. So these things are, I guess, very much in flux right now. So some member states, according to the Swedish trade minister, Sweden's position hasn't yet been determined. There have been reports that Germany is trying to persuade other member states to vote against the tariffs. What I have heard is that Germany will likely abstain on the vote if it does come to a vote, unless a negotiated solution is reached, unless enough member states are likely to vote against it. In that case, Germany might be tempted to also vote to block the tariffs.
And why has the European Commission not revealed final tariff proposals during recent meetings, and what concerns might be influencing this decision?
There were, let's just say, rumors that the Commission was going to tell member states what the final proposed tariffs would be on Monday this week. Some people said it was Monday, some people said it would be Tuesday. In any case, the idea...
So what happened then?
So what happened was, as far as we know, these final proposed tariffs have not been made. So basically, and it would have been interesting had they been made, because obviously if there was a steep decrease, you could regard this as a kind of conciliatory signal to China. But ultimately, those offers haven't been made. And it's interesting why it hasn't been made. One, this is just a theory, but one theory is that, the Commission doesn't want to perhaps reveal its position. It doesn't want to, if it makes a renewed offer, which if it, for instance, if it says, no, the top tariff rate is going to be 35.3%, that might anger China. If it's too low, it might be viewed as too conciliatory. So I think one possible interpretation is that the Commission is holding its cards quite close to its chest. It doesn't want to sort of tell member states what the final proposed tariffs will be yet. It needs to do this before this vote among member states takes place. There is no set deadline for when that vote is supposed to take place. It was originally supposed to take place on the 25th of September. Then it was delayed. We now don't know when it's going to take place. Today is Friday, 27th of September. The vote was supposed to have happened 2 days ago. It hasn't happened yet. The question as to why the vote hasn't taken place, I think the Commission does want to give negotiations time to take place. They want these technical discussions between Chinese officials and European officials to take place and see whether or not some kind of negotiated solution can be reached.
And what reasons did the European Commission provide for imposing provisional tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles in June 2023? And how have these tariffs changed since then?
One thing that I think is worth noting is that as I mentioned, the anti-subsidy probe into electric vehicles, it was announced in the same speech that the Draghi report, it was announced in the same speech that von der Leyen announced.
Draghi.
Asked Draghi, officially announced, okay, I'm going to ask Draghi to compile this report on European competitiveness.
Our industries and tech companies like competition. They know that global competition is good for business. But competition is only true as long as it is fair. Take the electric vehicle sector. It is a crucial industry for the clean economy with a huge potential in Europe. But global markets are now flooded with cheaper Chinese electric cars. And their price is kept artificially low by huge state subsidies. This is distorting our market. And as we do not accept this distortion from the inside in our market, we do not accept this from the outside. We must defend ourselves against unfair practices. But equally, it is vital to keep open lines of communication and dialogue with China, because there are also topics where we can and have to cooperate.
And in Draghi's report, I would say, and certainly China regards it this way, they view the report as quite hostile to China. So Draghi says China's a high-risk supplier of these things. He also criticizes Chinese overcapacity, which is a term that we've heard a lot recently. Basically, China is producing too much of this stuff. And Draghi's report was mentioned in every single mission letter to commissioners designate. So von der Leyen asked each and every commissioner to, the expression she used was draw on. So draw on Draghi's report going forward. So going forward, it's definitely possible that tensions could increase. I mean, a lot will depend ultimately on I think on the outcome of these EV negotiations. So, I mean, one thing that I think is very important to keep in mind is this electric vehicle investigation is kind of, in a way, it's achieved a kind of symbolic status. I mean, if you speak to analysts about this, they say, look, these tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, even if they're 35, 40%, whatever they are, they're not going to make Chinese vehicles less competitive compared to European and American electric vehicles. So right now, Tesla sells, I think its cheapest model sells for around about 40,000 euros in Europe. In China, BYD's cheapest electric vehicle sells for around about $10,000. So even if you have tariffs of like 35, 40%, whatever it is, that's absolutely, those are duties that absolutely Chinese car manufacturers can absorb. So it's not really about the tariffs per se. It's a symbolic. It's a struggle that I think epitomizes or kind of embodies these broader geopolitical tensions between China and Europe.
And what are the challenges?
European firms are stuck in the middle as a consequence of these kinds of the tensions between the United States and China.
Negotiations are ongoing, and of course for China, it is a matter of some urgency that this is being addressed and that the barriers for access to the European markets remain low.
Mentioned in an interview, Jens Eskelnut, president of the EU Chamber of Commerce in China.
Moreover, there's also, and I know that this has been discussed before, but this possibility of a Trump presidency. Trump has said that he could raise tariffs of up to 20% on European goods. It's interesting to note that recently America overtook China as Germany's largest trading partner, which means that these tariffs, if Trump imposes them, will really affect Germany's economy, which is already really struggling. There was a report out today. A joint projection by some of the leading think tanks and research institutes in Germany, which said that Germany's economy is set to contract again this year by 0.1%. It contracted 0.3% last year. Trump said, we might impose tariffs of up to 60% on all Chinese goods, which again could lead to all these, goods coming from China that are supposed to go to the United States that could be redirected and they could land in Europe and effectively be dumped on Europe. And so that could exacerbate things a lot more.
Right. This sounds like a power play between the two parties. What are the newest examples of cases that they're fighting over?
Europe has launched a WTO it's filed an official complaint with the WTO about China's electric vehicle tariffs. So China has launched or filed an official complaint with the WTO about Europe's EV probe. But Europe earlier this week, and this is something that's quite interesting, this is kind of an escalation of tensions, given the fact that tensions seem to have de-escalated last week. But Europe filed an official complaint with the WTO about this dairy investigation that China has launched. And you might think, well, so again, you had sort of de-escalation last week, and then there's kind of a bit of a ramp up of escalation this week. Why is Europe doing that? And you might say, well, it wants to put itself in a strong negotiating position going forward, saying, maybe the price offer you've made, maybe it's not sufficient, maybe it has to be higher or something. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens ultimately. But I do think that although there's a significant risk that tensions might increase going forward, I do think that if there is a negotiated solution to this, that will, at least in the short term, significantly ease tensions between Beijing and Brussels.
Now, what does each party take from this trading relationship between China and the EU?
If you compare the electric vehicle market to the markets in which China has launched its retaliatory probes, they kind of pale in comparison. So Europe imported 438,000 electric vehicles from China last year, worth about 9.7 billion euros. In comparison, China's imports of EU goods, so in particular of dairy products, that only amounted to 1.7 billion, so much less than 9.7 billion. It imported around 2.5 billion euros worth of pork and 1.4 billion euros worth of brandy. So although these things obviously add up, it's still less overall than the amount of EVs that Europe is importing from China. Moreover, the market for electric vehicles has increased significantly in recent years. So in 2022, global spending on electric vehicles was $425 billion dollars, which is up 50% compared to 2021. There are some estimates that this might rise to about 2 trillion in the early 2030s. So this is a market that's getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And so one thing that you do often hear is that China's retaliation has been largely symbolic. It's not quite tit for tat. And the reason why it's not tit for tat is because China doesn't want to, Europe is still a huge export market for Chinese goods, and China doesn't want to jeopardize that. Moreover, some analysts think that going forward, Trump's policies could potentially lead Europe to, again, look towards Beijing rather than Washington. And I think China wants to leave that open as a possibility.
Thank you very much, Tom. I am Evi Chiori, and this was Today in the EU podcast. Visit Euractiv to stay on top of the latest news. If you haven't subscribed yet, you can find us on all streaming platforms. You can get in touch with us by leaving a comment or a review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Your reviews help us a lot to spread the word about our work, but also understand what topics you like listening to. This episode was produced by Miriam Saenz de Tejada, Charles Cohen, and me. Thank you for tuning in, and until tomorrow morning. As part of our commitment to accuracy, inclusion, and transparency, Euractiv is part of the Trust Project.